Now, we all know Australia is deep in a housing crisis, and new figures this week show the number of new dwellings approved in Australia is at an 11-year low. The Greens now want to set up a public property developer to sell and rent homes it builds at below market prices. The party's housing spokesperson, Max Chandler-Mather, will debate the Property Council chief at the National Press Club today. He joins us now from Canberra. Max, very good morning to you.
Thanks for having me.
This is the Greens, effectively the first big election promise you are dropping today and speaking about it first here on News Breakfast. So tell us about how this new federal government housing department, this public property developer, will actually work.
So the Greens will scrap the massive tax handouts for property investors, denying millions of renters the chance to buy a home, and instead spend billions of dollars establishing a public property developer to build good quality homes and sell and rent them for prices people can actually afford. The average renter would save $5,200 a year on their rent. If they rented one of these properties, the average first home buyer $260,000 off the price of a home because we would cut out the massive profit margins that property developers chuck onto the price of housing. So we'd be selling just over the rate of construction for homes and capping rents at 25% of average household income. This is a really common sense approach. This is what governments used to do. Australia did post-World War II. Countries like Singapore or European countries have similar schemes because we recognise housing as a right. It's something that people need in this country to build a good life, like healthcare and education. So why not provide a public option where you remove all of the selection criteria and you say, look, if you're a teacher, you can move into one of these homes. If you're a doctor, if you're a pensioner, because right now the private construction market is not building enough homes. Like, that's just the reality because they put profit first and people last.
20% of the houses built for rental under this policy would be allocated to the bottom 20% of earners. What about the houses for purchase? Will they be means tested on an income basis, for instance?
No, they won't.
People on, say, $200,000 or more can buy a house under the Greens policy?
Exactly right. Just like anyone, regardless of their income, can send their kid to a public school, or anyone, regardless of their income, can go to an emergency ward in a public hospital. Like, the benefit, by the way, of broadening out who can live in these homes is we get a good social mix, diverse communities. We avoid concentrating disadvantage. But also the government earns more in rental and sales income they can put back into building more good quality homes. Part of the reason that schemes like this are so sustainable overseas, say in Europe, is because a teacher or a doctor or a nurse lives in one of these homes, as well as someone who's, say, really struggling, is that you diversify those households, but actually also bump up the income the government earns. Now, this seems like a really common sense approach because basically right now we're relying on private property developers who do not have an interest in affordable housing, by the way. They have an interest in making large profits. So say we cut out most of the profit margin, we stop price gouging Australians, we stop holding up supply like private property developers do to drive up prices, and instead we get government back in the business of building good quality homes and selling them and renting them.
As you say, so the cost will be borne by the taxpayer here, $28.9 billion over the decade. You talked about winding back tax concessions. Which tax concessions in particular would be scrapped to fund this?
Well, we have said that we'd like to see a phase out of negative gearing and the capital gains tax discount.
Altogether?
Well, our policy at the 2022 election, and we've said to the government that we're willing to negotiate on this, was we would phase it going forward. No one would be able to negatively gear, but we would grandfather people with one investment property. They'd get to keep it, and we'd completely phase out the capital gains tax discount. Now, this would raise billions of dollars, but just to give you some context here, in a single year, the federal budget this year, just 1 year, will spend $27 billion just in rental deductions for property investors. Now, you've just said our policy over the 10 years will cost, well, it's about $27.9 billion to the underlying cash balance. So that's 10 years of cost. 1 year property investors get that. So I think we can talk about, it's pretty affordable actually for the government over 10 years to do this. What it will do though is threaten the profit margins of property developers. What it will do is threaten the massive profit margins of the banks and a property industry who has got far too used to price gouging and ripping off Australians for something as essential as a home.